In just a few minutes, the talented Mrs. Ellis will be speaking at length about her third selection in this year's Month of Bev. But you know how we do things around here. We don't start a movie review without first promoting our chums at Sparkplug Coffee. We don't want a pleasantly bland person to end up murdering us after all. The never murderous folks at Sparkplug want you to know that they offer the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in Canada. We Canucks and our Yankee neighbors will get orders shipped to us within a week. Our fellow Canadians get to enjoy free shipping, too. And what do you get in those bags? Well, Sparkplug has half calf and decaf if you need to go that route. Rather than jam full calf into your mug, they've got all kinds of blends and roasts. Rotating seasonal blends are even in play. But however you take it, you're going to love your Java from this company, so give some serious thought to becoming a member of the Autopilot Coffee Club. You'll get perks and deals that a non-member won't, and you'll save money on every order. Sparkplug even allows you to customize to get your orders when it suits your life. Going to Europe to commit a handful of murders? Then pause your membership, or cancel it because maybe you're never coming back. That's a horrible thought, but that flexibility does prove that this isn't some smothering Coffee of the Month club, or bashing over the head, or, well, twice bashing over the head, and one smothering. The website to peruse is sparkplug.coffee. They continue to offer a 20% discount to our listeners who apply our HYES promo code. So add /HYES to the web address in your browser, and then you'll be able to pay a little less while snagging something awesome. Well, Sparkplug tastes great, but we need to get our fill of Matt Damon's criminal exploits now. Bev, how about cueing the tunes?
And action! Have you ever seen
the talented Mr. Ripley? Ciao, crazy kids, and grazie for listening to the 564th edition of Have You Ever Seen? This podcast reviews classic films every Monday, and lots of Fridays, too, and we want to apologize for spoiling every little bit of this week's movie. I'm the pot-bellied wise-ass who wonders, Tommy, how's the peeping? Tommy, how's the peeping? Ryan Ellis. And here's a lady who's gaga for Jude Law, and who knows it's better to be a fake somebody than a real nobody, my wife, Bev.
That's me.
Would you do the same things that Matt Damon does in this movie to be a real somebody or a fake somebody?
To be with Jude Law? I don't care who you are, man, woman, gay, straight. That man has got to appeal to you. In this movie.
Yeah, he's beautiful in this movie. I don't think he's as beautiful as you often do in every movie or a lot of the movies he's in, but this one, yes.
I will agree that his beauty can be turned on and turned off depending on how much he wants to turn on the charisma. In a movie like, say, Contagion.
Well, he's supposed to look terrible in that.
He's not hot, but also his personality is vile in that movie. Mm-hmm. He's a true villain. But this might be him at the peak of his powers.
Perhaps so. Okay, the coming attractions trivia for the talented Mr. Ripley, your third choice in the month of Bev. The mysterious, yearning, secretive, sad, lonely, troubled, confused, loving, musical, gifted, intelligent, beautiful, tender, sensitive, haunted, passionate, and talented Mr. Ripley has been adapted into a movie several times. Who are the two actors who played him since Matt Damon played the part in Anthony Minghella's 1999 version that we're covering right now?
So they've made two movies out of the sequels based on Patricia Highsmith's books.
Quick thing, by the way, I thought that what we're about to talk about are adaptations of the first one. So there may be other things. I could be wrong. Go ahead, though.
Well, there's one called Ripley's Game. There's a Patricia Highsmith book called Ripley's Game. Right.
That's what I'm saying. I screwed this up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
You're about to say the right name, though, I think.
Yeah, it's John Malkovich.
Right.
And Barry Pepper played him in Ripley Underground.
Correct.
And two actors played him before this movie came out.
That's why I said since.
Yes, yeah. Alain Delon.
In Purple Noon, is it called?
Plein Soleil, Purple Noon. French film from 1960. That's not a strictly faithful adaptation, but certainly very much based on this, and he plays Tom Ripley. And the adaptation that most people refer to, secondary to this adaptation for sure. And another movie, I think more loosely based on the character, called The American Friend, where Dennis Hopper plays Thomas Ripley.
Oh, Hopper, really?
Yeah.
What a diverse, in some case, weird choices. Malkovich, Hopper, and then Damon and Pepper. Damon and Pepper aren't that similar, but okay. Malkovich and Hopper, I guess, compare in a way. But how do those two compare to those two?
Alain Delon, I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation, he's a French actor. He would be way better likened to Jude Law in this film. He's a really good-looking guy and was the better looking of the pair in that version.
Damon worked with Malkovich and Pepper in two separate films the year before this. This is the height of Damon. He's been good for all the years since this movie. 25 years now. But this was his height in 98 and I guess 97 with Good Will Hunting in a way and The Rainmaker. and then 99. But anyway, Malkovich was in Rounders, hanging around with Damon, and they share two great scenes together, opening and then the end. And then Barry Pepper and he don't really share that much in the way of screen time together, but they're both part of the siege at the end in Saving Private Ryan.
Right.
Both movies in 1998, the year before this.
You and I were talking about how Contagion also stars Matt Damon, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Jude Law.
And Damon is married to Gwyneth Paltrow on that.
Yeah.
Briefly share screen time together.
I think it's a great question you came up with, mostly because it allows us to start by talking about the enduring appeal of these books. Patricia Highsmith wrote 5 books with the character of Tom Ripley, starting with The Talented Mr. Ripley, and they're incredibly popular, and they have this enduring popularity, and Hollywood just keeps going back to this well.
Yeah, they're due to probably do something with this again. Damon, I read, it's his favorite of his roles.
So cool.
Maybe that's not true anymore. Sometimes people have said that.
I mean, come on. Was that before or after he made We Bought a Zoo?
That's number 2. All right. I Like Your Life, So I'm Taking It was a co-production of Paramount and Miramax going on 25 years ago on Christmas Day, 1999. Another guy at the height of his powers, Harvey Weinstein, back in this time frame. The film did all right domestically, but was a definite success when you factor in foreign markets, and you should, because money is money. But Bev, this is a complicated story. It needs an explaining, so please give us a skinny on that boring leech known as the talented Mr. Ripley.
Matt Damon is Tom Ripley.
Matt Damon!
A struggling con man who manages to convince a shipping magnate that he can convince his son, Jude Law's Dickie Greenleaf, to give up his life in Italy to return to New York. Tom goes to Italy, befriends Dickie and his girlfriend Marge, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, and quickly falls in love with his Mark. Or does he fall in love with his lifestyle? Or does he simply want to become Dickie? When his admiration turns to obsession, Dickie starts to turn on Tom, and in a panic rage, Tom kills him, then assumes his identity to cover up that there was a murder at all. The plan would have worked if Tom could have resisted really committing to the part and subsuming himself into his new identity. He gets into trouble when Dickie's world starts colliding with Tom's assumed role, and he has to commit more murders in order to keep his secret.
Including Philip Seymour Hoffman and Jack Davenport, who plays Peter, and of course, Hoffman plays Freddie Miles. Or, in a nutshell, toilet attendant goes abroad and kills 3.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty nicely.
He is a toilet attendant at the very beginning. With a borrowed Princeton jacket, which is why Herbert thinks he's from Princeton, because he's wearing the jacket.
Well, he's not wearing the jacket when he's attending to the toilet.
No. But
he has
goes
a
up,
uniform.
yeah.
They only show like one scene of him as a toilet attendant, but it tells you so much about him. Clearly, this man is in the working class. Toilet attendant is a pretty low-class job. But it makes him mingle with the high class, and this is a man who, we learn pretty quickly, is obsessed with the upper classes and very desperately wants to become them and fit in the ranks.
Yeah. And he's Matt Damon, so he fits in pretty well. Although I still don't, and we talked about this during the movie, believe that he resembles Jude Law enough that anyone would actually make that mistake. Although, as you point out, when we talked about it then, it's not that people are literally thinking he's Dickie if they didn't already know Dickie or him. The screenplay, and I'm sure the book, are actually pretty clever in how he stays one step ahead of everybody. It is a pretty effective thriller. It was on the AFI's Thrills nominee list. It was one of the 400. Didn't make the list. And it probably shouldn't have, but that's pretty impressive to be in the nominees list. Maybe could have been at the top 100 Passions, too, because he's in love with Dickie, no doubt about it.
Well, if you just Google The Talented Mr. Ripley 1999, what you don't get are articles about this movie. What you do get are dozens and dozens and dozens of articles saying the top 100 thrillers, top 25 thrillers. This makes a lot of people's top lists of thrillers. And at this point, it's 25 years old. I think it probably is considered more of a classic now than it would have been when those lists came out, when it was still fairly new. I think it still is part of the public imagination, and it's aged so well.
It has aged well. I was just about to say that when you stopped talking. Got to jump in while you were talking, because I agree with you completely. The Rotten Tomatoes critics like it pretty well. Not incredibly, but well. 85% of them say good. 7.3 out of 10 is the average. There are 138 reviews on the site. 138. And 80% of audiences. It was 27th at the 1999 U.S. box office, one of my favorite years ever, if not my very favorite year ever. I'm sure we're going to cover a ton of movies from that year in this year. The Sixth Sense was number 2. The Matrix was number 5. And American Beauty, the Best Picture winner, was number 13. We've covered all of those. I'm sure Harvey was super pissed that this wasn't a nominee for Best Picture, because he was constantly getting his movie's Best Picture nominations around this time frame, and this was a bit of a surprise. Just like Cold Mountain by Minghella, starring Jude Law, didn't get a Best Picture nomination. I remember reading a whole article about how he wasn't, oh, no, I'm not that mad about that. City of God got us nominations, and Cold Mountain got all these other things. Not Best Picture. he probably fucking lost his mind that they didn't get a Best Picture nomination out of that or this.
Especially after, was there many greater successes in Miramax's history than The English Patient, Minghella's film that he made before The Talented Mr. Ripley?
Right, and then Shakespeare in Love.
I'm just talking about Minghella films. Anthony Minghella, the director, English Patient famously just swept the Oscars. Not like the all-time greatest Oscar winner, but it wasn't...
On the short list, though.
Do you know off the top of your head how many it won?
I can look around while you're talking.
Anyway, as I recall, it
my brand new laptop,
dominated this year.
My brand new laptop sitting beside us might have the fan come on. I thought it wouldn't have any noise at all. It won 9.
That's an extraordinary achievement
and
for Miramax.
Several of the people involved in that movie were involved in this one.
Yeah, Minghella said that he brought a lot of people back that worked with him there. Yeah,
including none of the actors, I guess. No, the big stars anyway. Okay, as for Oscar nominations for Mr. Ripley, it had 5. Jude Law for Best Supporting Actor. One of my favorite categories ever, one of the great speeches ever, Michael Caine winning for The Cider House Rules, which was also a Miramax movie, and that did get a Best Picture nomination. So it won for Caine and for the screenplay, the adapted screenplay, which this was nominated for. So there you go. This movie lost to The Cider House Rules, both of those categories. So Minghella's adapted screenplay was nominated for this, though. Gabriel Yared, I guess that's how you say his name, his music score, and the sets and the costumes. Now, we know you love this movie an awful lot. I've said I like it. Probably more this time. I'm surprised we don't own it. I thought we did, but we did have to pay for it on iTunes. So be it. It was worth the money. What are your thoughts on The Talented Mr. Ripley?
Yeah, I still adore this movie. It's beautiful. The locations, the 50s aesthetic, these gorgeous actors. It's a total feast for the eyes. Jude Law, in particular, as we were saying, he has this unmatched charisma. I dare anyone not to fall in love with him in this movie. But the main attraction for me is the character of Tom Ripley. One of the great sympathetic villains, but not sympathetic. Completely irredeemable, but you love them anyway, like Hannibal Lecter or Amy Dunn.
Norman Bates.
Norman Bates, yes. This is somebody who is evil, who you should not at all be rooting for, but the movie manipulates you into rooting for him and wanting him to win, even though you absolutely shouldn't.
Because
but, he's
we're with
clever
him.
And he's charming. Yeah, we're with him, but
That's
also
why.
He's outsmarting everybody, and everybody loves that, and he has a kind of charm. And it's really a great piece of writing to have us on his side at all times. Earlier this year, I read the book. I completely, immediately understood why the character has such endurance. But Patricia Highsmith paints a picture of a much worse person than this movie does. This movie is incredibly generous towards him.
You maybe wouldn't get Matt Damon, the height of his powers, to be in this if he was a lot worse. I'm sure Damon had no problem with playing what we see on screen, including what appears to be bisexuality. He and Peter aren't just friends. Even before that, though, his feelings about Dickie. It isn't really that he does anything necessarily blatantly obvious that he actually wants him. Well, there you're right. He does make a play
the
for him.
bathtub scene, he's putting his toe in the water, his fingers in the water, so to speak.
I think Freddie might be gay, or at least bisexual.
I think so, too. You mentioned this. The way he plays it is funny. He talks about all of his conquests, all the women that he's sleeping with, but we never ever see him with a woman. And he has his own kind of protective obsession with Dickie.
He also plays it Faye. Phil does.
He plays it so Faye. He literally has a limp wrist. Why does he hate Tom so much from the jump?
And vice versa.
He sees himself in him. He's like, I got here first. This man is mine. You go find your own.
The biggest difference is that Freddie is rich and Tom is not, and Tom is good looking and Freddie is not. Although Damon doesn't look all that good in this movie compared to what he could look like. He's in quite good shape. Not the way they're cut now, but he is quite cut. He's also so pale. Damon must not have gone anywhere near the sun, although Jude Law and Gwyneth Paltrow must have bathed in the sun for weeks straight.
They did, as a matter of fact.
And maybe makeup
helps
part
of their prep.
They look incredible. Damon looks more like a vampire, although he's not bad looking. Your sister Pam's always been a little bit, not obsessed, but that's her crush.
It's her celebrity crush.
And this would not be the movie that she'd feel that way.
Oh, no, absolutely not. He lost weight for this part, although you wouldn't look at him and say he looks scrawny, but you look at him in this movie compared to, say, Good Will Hunting, and you can say, wow, this man just looks so much better when he has that extra 20 pounds or whatever it is he lost for this part, so that he could be kind of a pipsqueak, but also he wanted to better match Jude Law's look, and Jude Law is just a much more naturally slim man. Jude Law put weight on, and Matt Damon lost weight so that they could look more alike.
Right, but you don't think they actually look that much alike, right?
No, they don't. They have totally different faces. Anyone who mistakes Tom for Dickie is not mistaking two people for one another. They're mistaking a passport photo for him. And the passport photo is black and white and high contrast. Not a great photo, so it's not that hard to believe.
None of us look good in our passport photos.
None of us look good, but it truly is black and white. It just isn't a good pass for him.
Yeah. And doesn't Tom scratch it out as well when he gets Dickie's passport and starts becoming
Which
him?
everybody interprets as a suicidal gesture, but of course is useful to anybody who would have met him and thought he was Dickie, and anybody who would have met Dickie for real, identifying who they were speaking to at the time.
So Meredith, the Cate Blanchett character, always thinks that he's Dickie because that's how he introduces himself when they first meet. There's no story.
Completely unnecessary thing for him to do.
Yeah.
So he's been...
So why does he do it?
So why does he do it? But I think this is the key to his character right there. He's a bit of a ne'er-do-well. He gets very lucky in that he borrows someone's Princeton jacket when he's playing at an event with Senior Greenleaf. I can't remember his name. Herbert Greenleaf.
Which is Dickie's actual name, too. He's Herbert Richard Greenleaf. I think third, at least second. I think he said third, though.
Oh, there you go. So he thinks that he went to Princeton because he's wearing a borrowed jacket. And he says, hey, do you know my son? Why don't you go to Italy and bring him home for me?
And I'll pay, what, $1,000 in 1958?
A free first-class trip to Italy and $1,000. But I don't get the impression from the jump that he has any true intention to carry out this task. I think he knows right away that he might just try and coast and stay in Italy and take his money and con Herbert.
Which he does do.
He wants in on this life. This is his ticket. He's just going to see how far it takes him. And he's practicing when he meets Meredith in line. Or he's so deeply entrenched in his own fantasy that he's already pretending to be Dickie. I can never see you actually doing this, but when I was young and I used to go to clubs and I would drink and I would meet strangers I knew I was never going to see again, sometimes I would lie to them. I would never do an accent because I'm bad at accents. I'd make up names, I'd make up stories, whatever, and then if it ever got in too deep, I would just walk away and not come back, and it was fun. Nobody really gets hurt.
It would be fun, though, if you're on vacation or something like that.
Exactly.
And if I were to try to, I don't know if I even do the great, I love doing it, but Stallone, just talk like him the whole night. Hey, over there, what you doing there? Just try to stay in that character all night long.
And I'm like way too much of a chicken to do it when there's real stakes. So I wondered if it's a bit of that he lives so deeply entrenched in this fantasy of being a member of the upper class that maybe he does stuff like that all the time, and Dickie's just on his mind because he's been studying him, he's been listening to jazz, all these things. Yeah. So he's trying to get in this man's mindset, and he makes what turns out to be a crucial mistake by introducing himself to Meredith as Dickie.
Yeah, because I'm going to get to what happens next right now. Because she could have outed him so many times, and he has to kill Peter at the end, even though he seems like he's in love with the guy, because he knows that Meredith and Peter, who know each other, are going to talk about how, oh, you're with Dickie. No, I'm with Tom. Then he's going to be outed. So what happens next is Tom waits until Meredith is in just the right position by the railing on that ship. Then she, whoops, has an accident and goes in the drink because he can't trust that she won't out him somewhere down the line.
Well, Dickie's supposed to be dead at this point. Mm-hmm. So she's going to land somewhere and say, oh, I just had a voyage with Dickie Greenleaf. They're all going to talk about it. They all seem to know each other.
Peter is going to be what really does it because they're both in the same boat
So
together.
you have Peter going missing. You have records of Peter being on the boat.
No, if he doesn't kill Peter, though, they would have had a conversation, and then he's out.
But I'm saying even with Peter dead, how on earth does Tom get away with this? Because Dickie's supposed to be dead. So the second Meredith starts telling people that she saw Dickie on this boat, it's either going to reopen this investigation implying, oh, he never did commit suicide. They had settled everything.
And Marge believes already that he killed Dickie.
Exactly. So it feels like it's right there a total disaster. I'm not sure how he gets out of this. Now, this is not how the book ends at all. Mm-hmm. The book ends with him getting away more or less scot-free. Meredith is a character that was invented for the film. Peter's a character in the book, but he's barely in the book. The story focuses way more on Dickie, Marge, and then Freddie.
Do you think, by the way, it'd be more effective if we didn't make it blatant? Although the movie doesn't make it absolutely blatant that they have a relationship, but I think it's supposed to imply, it must imply, that Peter and Tom are involved in the last maybe 10 minutes of the movie, however long that's lasted. Maybe that was a bad idea because you've got this homoeroticism, but now you've made it pretty clear that at the end, this guy was always at least bisexual, meaning Tom, if he's with Peter. It would have been more interesting if it wasn't...
How do you say he's bisexual? The only time he's with a woman is when he kisses Meredith as a subterfuge.
Right. So there you go. He's gay then. And that's fine. I'm just saying that it would be more compelling or more interesting or more deep or would provide a better discussion. We've had a good discussion already. But if this homoerotic movie with him being obsessed with this Greek god, Jude Law, at the end of the movie we know, well, he actually did want him then. He wanted to be him and he wanted him. I don't think he ever actually wanted to kill him. One of the great shots in any movie that year, and that was a great year for movies and a great year for shots, is after he's whacked him on the head more than once with that oar, And the makeup, I don't know if I love the makeup on Jude Law or hate it, but...
Oh, I love it. That
I think I
special
basically love it,
effect.
because it looks like his hair's gone.
It's a prosthetic. They had to make it look like
the blood coming out seems very realistic.
Yeah.
The way blood does come. It doesn't immediately come spurting out. But anyway, he hits him again, and then the shot I'm talking about is overhead, and you see him cuddling with the corpse.
Yeah, Dickie is dead, and they're in the bottom of the boat, and he's placed himself so that he's cuddling with him.
And why do that? That's not for anyone's benefit.
Yeah.
It's because, I can't believe I killed my lover. Although they weren't lovers, but he wanted him to be.
And he killed him eventually out of self-preservation. It is a self-defense killing.
Yeah.
Starts off as this passionate argument. Dickie's being incredibly mean. Dickie's threatening to take away his friendship, which I think to Tom at that point is like a death. His friendship is so important to him that the fear of being abandoned and starting from scratch again. What is Tom without Dickie at this point? Is he going back to New York and becoming a washroom attendant again? It's not like he has friends or family out there. This is an incredibly lonely man. They don't really tell us about his background, but we can assume he's a gay man in the 50s. He seems to have no family, nobody who's close to him.
Bad eyes.
Bad eyesight, not a plus at all.
I relate.
And so he's this fundamentally lonely man who hates himself. We can presume he's been rejected for who he is because he's a gay man in the 50s, which could be part of the source of why he fantasizes about becoming someone else. Then that can kind of rationalize, explain why he flies into such a rage when Dickie's rejecting him, and then why their fight leads to him killing him.
Dickie keeps saying, I'm never going back to America like his father wants, which will end up being true, not for the reason he thinks. But I guess you could say that Tom has the same thought. I'm never going back to the lifestyle you just talked about.
Yeah, he wants what they have.
It's also a key scene, I don't know, somewhere around this point. Obviously, I think it's before Dickie dies. Yeah, because I think Dickie's talking with Freddie, and Marge and Tom are watching, something like that. And Marge says about how he makes you feel like you're the only person in the whole world. So she's felt that and then not felt that. But he talks about how he's going to marry her right before he gets killed. He's going to marry Marge, even though he's cheated on her with that woman, Savannah, who drowned herself because she was pregnant, and he was going to reject her. And God knows how many other people he's banged while he's over there, and will in the future. If they had a future and they did get married, he would never be loyal to her.
Yeah,
he wasn't
Marge
already.
should not want to marry him. She should just move on.
But when you're this good looking and this charming and this talented, it's funny too, it's truly a supporting actor performance by Jude Law, because he's out of the movie with more than half the movie to go. He's dead long before. Yet at the same point, it's one of those movies where, yes, it's called The Talented Mr. Ripley, but Dickie Greenleaf, the name, is mentioned long before he comes into the film, and then certainly all the way through afterwards. I think it was Orson Welles that says, if you're not going to be in a movie, all the scenes of a movie, that kind of thing, then at least be mentioned by the characters all the time. He did a movie where he's, I think, in the last maybe third of it, but they talk about, well, it's not the third man specifically, but that's true of that movie too. He did some movie that I don't think anyone knows, where he's the character that they all talk about, but he's barely in the film. So if you're not going to be in the film that much, be mentioned all the time, which Dickie certainly is in this film. And him being dead, yeah, it allows Tom to do all these great things and have all this great life that he wouldn't have had. Even if Dickie was still alive, he wouldn't have been doing these things he's doing. But he's constantly in the movie. So Jude Law took this part. At first he didn't want to do it. Then he realized, what am I talking about? I get to act with all these great actors. Minghella had won the Oscar.
Chill in Italy for a month or two.
And be worshipped. The movie's about worshiping him, even though he is not always a very good guy. He's very likable and charismatic, but he's also a dickhead.
Yeah.
And then one of the reasons why the Philip Baker Hall character, the investigator who comes along with Herbert when they go over there to Italy, basically closes the investigation is because he does have a history of being violent, and they can believe he could have killed Freddie.
I think he's playing it like a straight narcissist. And it's funny, the line, when he focuses his light on you, you feel like you're the only person in the world, is one of those telltale descriptions of a narcissist. And what it's like to be in a narcissist's thrall.
Bill Clinton's like that, too.
Who's another person pretty regularly described as a textbook narcissist. Dickie can charm all these people, but he doesn't care that he's hurting Tom's feelings. When he gets bored of Tom, it's partially because Tom is taking it too far, because he's not so subtly hitting on him, trying to suggest that they could be lovers. And he's worried that Tom has a crush on him, and then he catches him dancing around in his clothes.
I thought that was a pretty weird reason to be as upset as Dickie is.
It's weird.
He's told him to wear his clothes. He's doing it now.
Okay, but he's dancing around,
so
being
what?
incredibly effeminate, and I think there's a bit of gay panic going on in Dickie's mind. But most of all, he's just sick of it. He had this new friend who was all fun and charming and everything, and now Freddie's back, and he wants to do things that Tom can't afford to do. It doesn't take much for him to ditch him as a friend and move on with his life. All right, the story of Tom Ripley is a chapter in his book he can close, but of course for Tom Ripley it just doesn't work that way.
And of course when he's peeping, as the peeping, is when Dickie and Marge are below deck getting it on, but Tom is watching. And, of course, the suggestion in a lot of movies could be, oh, he wants to be with her. But no, in this movie, clearly, he wants to be with him. Tom wants to be with Dickie.
Gwyneth Paltrow is gorgeous in this film.
But she pales compared to Jude Law, because everyone
Still.
does.
Yeah, still.
I love Cate Blanchett, not necessarily for her looks. I think she got better looking as she got older, actually. She looks great, too, but the women are not the draw in this movie. Well, it's pretty much just Jude Law, because Damon doesn't look his best at all, and certainly not Philip Seymour Hoffman or Philip Baker Hall or James Rebhorn.
Here's where we have to address that all these incredible actors that we're naming were not movie stars.
Oh, okay. Yes, they were.
When they got cast.
Okay, maybe then.
When the film came out, they were movie stars. Gwyneth Paltrow had won an Oscar, and Matt Damon won an Oscar, all between getting cast and the film coming out.
Okay.
So Minghella talks about how lucky he was that it got his film so much good press. Jude Law was not nominated for an Oscar, but he was definitely up-and-comer at that point.
He was nominated for this.
He was nominated for
this. Not for Gattaca. No. Gattaca, which is a very similar story, where it's Ethan Hawke who wants to be the guy with the perfect genetics.
Literally takes his identity. Yeah. The guy with the perfect genetics. Yeah, exactly. Philip Seymour Hoffman, he was still up-and-coming at this point.
But he'd done a lot of great things in the year or two that, right when he got cast.
This was a breakout film for a lot of them. Cate Blanchett, another one. She wasn't a nobody.
Coming off of Elizabeth, though, Oscar nomination.
Yeah. This film just had great casting and great timing.
One of the key scenes is when he sets it up that Meredith meets up with Marge and Peter at a cafe, and he watches from afar to make sure that they meet, and they all think Dickie's still alive, because in Meredith's eyes, he is, because he's Dickie.
Such a clever bit of writing.
But then Meredith leaves in a bit of a huff, and he can go and say, oh, I'm sorry I was so late, watching the whole time, to Marge and Peter, and then join them as Tom. And also at the opera, when he barely gets out of that situation. That's why this movie is a thriller as much as anything else. It's these near misses, and we're rooting for him because we spend every minute with him. And like you say, he's also intelligent. But it's like that scene in Psycho. We've mentioned this a lot lately. That might be the quintessential example of that, where Norman Bates is trying to bury the car in the swamp, meaning Marianne's car, and it stops for a minute. And you should want it to stop, because you don't want this murderer to get away with killing this girl. We don't know he's the murderer at that point. We haven't seen the movie yet. You think it's his mother. But we don't want this assistant to a murderer to get away with it. But we do at the same point, because you already like the guy, and it's a movie, so you have to root for what's happening on screen in a strange way.
Yeah, in that scene, you're just on his side. You're with him. Anthony Perkins does a great bit of performing there, of his anticipation, his fear that the car isn't just getting sucked into the bog like he planned. And then it moves, and you're like, oh, relief. And then, of course, the audience is like,
you shouldn't be relieved.
Am I complicit in this? But that's part of the beauty of it. It's part of what makes a great thriller. Minghella changed. He wrote the script as well as directed, and he changed a lot of the story, including that cafe scene that you're describing. Of course, Meredith and Peter were not characters in the book. And all of those machinations are so finely tuned and so smart, and a good adaptation of the way that Patricia Highsmith wrote the book.
Improving on it, you mean?
I don't know if it's an improvement, because, like I said, I really, truly love the book, and the book has all these other clever ways that Ripley gets away with it, the way that he either improvises in an interview at the last minute and just always knows the right thing to say to explain, why do I have the rings? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? He can always come up with something, and such a great liar. But I'm just impressed at how Minghella can write the way that Patricia Highsmith wrote. Okay. That he can come up with these scenarios as well as she does that really fit with the plot. There's a true elegance to the way he weaves all these things together. The only thing I'll say, and I didn't think about this till way later when I was thinking about the film, that it's a little too much the coincidence of how often these people run into each other, even though they're all in Italy, and that makes sense, even though they're in high society, so it's not that out of the question that they would all go to the opera, right? That they would all be in the same place at the same time. But how many times does he run into Meredith?
4, maybe?
He meets her on the boat. She sees him from the street.
Yeah.
Well, she's his date to the opera, but while they're there, they run into Marge, and that's where he meets Peter.
Yeah.
So that's also an elaborate coincidence.
And then at the end.
That's a lot of times to run into somebody in any city, under any circumstances.
But Minghella added her character because he loved the fact he got Cate Blanchett, and he liked what she was doing, so...
Yeah, he kept actually beefing her character up because she was so wonderful.
And this isn't her best work ever. We'll go over the cast list soon and how many credits they all have, especially Damon and Hoffman. We've only ever covered Cate Blanchett, though, twice before this. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring was on the AFI's Top 100 list, so that's why we covered that. And then Carol, which we loved. We covered that quite a few years ago. But
also
it's only...
based on a Patricia Highsmith novel.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm a huge fan of hers, and yet only 3 times in this channel. She's won 2 Oscars. In fact, this cast at least the main one, I think it's the entire cast of the whole movie, but the main stars have 5 Oscars between them. Damon and Paltrow, you already said, had won before. Blanchett won twice since, and Hoffman won since this. But we'll go over their credits a little bit later on. When Freddy shows up at Tom's hotel and knows something's afoot, because why is Tom there at all, especially in this posh place, and Dickie's supposedly there, but he's just not there right now, but then this isn't Dickie's style. He wouldn't do this kind of stuff. The landlady truly outs Tom, though, and for the second time in the film, our hero, our villain, bashes somebody over the head, and now Hoffman's dead. Hoffman's probably died in a lot of movies. This is a pretty gruesome one, but just gets whacked over the head with that bust. And I think I read about how that's some kind of important, I don't know, it meant something. Minghella wrote some person to use as that bust. I don't know how the hell that thing got fully cleaned off, although forensics weren't as good back then. But when that investigating officer comes in and we see the statue, the head of the statue, doesn't have blood on it anymore, Tom is thorough to get all that blood off there. But then he would probably think of things like that.
Oh, yeah, the guy's a good criminal. He's incredibly smart and effective criminal who can keep his cool in circumstances that I think people with a conscience cannot. Mm-hmm. And as ambiguous as this movie is, I don't think he really has a conscience. He's sad that Dickie dies because he loves Dickie, but I don't think he ever really cares that he killed him.
Well, he didn't want to lose him because he didn't want to lose him. It's not exactly. The world lost him. It's a curious line that Herbert has later on when he's in Italy, and he says, you can't choose your children. Because Dickie was never, he said, never going to go back. He certainly wasn't going to run some shipping company. Maybe he would have eventually. People do calm down and change their lives and realize, oh, I want to do this after all. It might have been many years later before they ever do it, but he was living off his daddy's dime, just vacationing. It wasn't like he was doing anything useful over there at all.
He was a jazz musician. What are you talking about?
Good for him. If his father's going to pay for it, enjoy your life if you can possibly afford to, but his dad wants him to do other things, and if you want this money, maybe you should be doing those other things. So I appreciate that he had fun, but there is a point where you got to go back to regular life, and maybe he would have eventually. He was saying he was going to marry Marge. I don't think he can live on his father's dime as a married man for too long. He probably realizes, I got to go and do, maybe even says in that scene with Tom before Tom kills him, I got to go back after all because I got to have a normal life at some point.
It's curious that his father doesn't just cut off his allowance. That would bring him back to New York toot sweet.
Right, he wouldn't die. He would just fly home. He'd make sure he has enough money. And if he didn't have it, it'd be, okay, I'm wiring this, you're coming home, or that is absolutely it. And he would come home. Tom was going to kill Marge before Peter interfered over the rings. What does he ever say about why he has the rings? Does she just drop it because Peter interferes? In a good way. Peter comes in the room and stops Tom from the Fatal Attraction thing, similar to that. At the end of the movie, when Glenn Close is stroking her leg with the knife, Tom cuts himself, like as he cuts his hand, but he's got a knife. He's going to kill Marge if he has to. Yeah,
he is. Marge is a pretty different character in the book, and he actually convinces her when she sees the rings and he thinks, oh no, I'm going to have to kill her. She's on to me. Instead, she goes, but he loved these rings. He said he would never take them off. If he took them off, then he truly must have killed himself. So she sees the rings, and at that point, she's actually convinced of the story that he committed suicide, and Tom gets away with it again. He gets pretty lucky, actually, at the end of the book.
The character in this movie, though, was not suicidal at all.
No, of course not. Which is part of how Marge knows that can't be the case, even if the law were on to him. And that's the thing with narcissists. Apparently, narcissists almost never kill themselves unless they're dead to rights. Like Hitler, in the bunker.
Okay, yeah.
Then you kill yourself because you don't want to face
the world can't do without me.
Well, yeah, but suicidality is not a common thing with narcissists.
Okay.
What does he say to her? Does he say he gave the rings away and he didn't want her to believe the worst, that he was suicidal or something? That's the argument he makes. Doesn't matter because it doesn't work on her. There's that great scene near the end when Herbert and the private detective are trying to just usher her into the boat and take her home, and she's trying to tell she's like Cassandra, trying to tell everybody the truth. Tom did, and Tom's right there, but it doesn't matter what she says because she's a hysterical woman, and they all just want to believe what they want to believe. That Tom, this upstanding young man, could never be capable of this. How could she say this? She's just so distressed. Don't listen to her.
And Dickie has a negative past by being violent. And maybe there's a part of Herbert that doesn't want his son to die, but maybe isn't that distraught because he does have that line where you can't choose your children.
Yeah.
It's obviously terrible that Tom kills either Dickie or Freddy. You don't miss Freddy as much as you do Dickie, and then Freddy's murder is covered up by Herbert and the private investigator, played by Philip Baker Hall. But then he kills Peter, which is way more tragic feeling than the other ones. We don't see it on screen, but we know he's doing it. I'm sorry, Tom is saying as he's strangling this guy to death. But this is a classic example of how a movie makes you root for the most awful person. We've been saying that all along here.
So the film has quite a few beautiful themes that play out, but I'd say one of the main themes is duality. You start with Tom, who's something of a blank slate. We only see him when he's in some state of deception. It's rare that we get to see him really being himself, and I get the impression that he doesn't really know himself. He's a young man, so to begin with, when you're at that age, you are trying on identities anyway. What he's doing is almost an extreme version of that. He respects the wealthy, he wants to be wealthy, so he's trying on Dickie's identity. But even when he tries on Dickie's identity, he's not Dickie. He's like a third different person. He's this way more buttoned up and sophisticated version of Dickie. You know, he likes opera, and he wears his clothes, but he just wears them differently. He just doesn't have that free and easy way that Dickie has. He does his impersonations of him, but he never really is performing that. He takes a part of Dickie's identity that he wants and just applies it to Tom. And of course, who is Tom? Tom is also somebody that he's putting on because we know he has to perform as a straight man. So he's already always putting on an identity. Minghella, one of the things he does really beautifully in all his films is he just has such a gift for visually representing the film in these beautifully composed shots. He has such an eye for it, and the film makes great use of mirrors and reflective surfaces.
Yep.
I can't take credit for noticing this. Somebody on YouTube pointed this out, that there's a point where he's made the decision that he has to let Dickie, the persona, go, because in order to get away with these murders, he has to let Dickie take the rap. He's framed him for all these things, so he can only be Tom from now on.
Changes the hair?
Oh yeah, I'll talk about the hair, but first I'm talking about this beautiful shot where he's closing the lid on a piano and you see his face reflected in the highly varnished wood. And it starts off with this dual kaleidoscopic image of his head, and then the two heads as the lid is coming down separate, and we just see the one upside down image of Tom, implying that he's no longer two people. Now he's just this one guy. He's just Tom, who's the lesser guy. Mm. And speaking of the hair, Tom parts his hair on the right, and Dickie parts his hair on the left. And there's this thing, I remember reading about this years ago, so I looked it up for this because I knew it would be relevant. There's a popular theory that we subconsciously judge people by the way they part their hair. That parting your hair on the left,
like I do,
like you do, is the hero's part. It's very traditionally male. It's perceived as popular, successful, strong, and
describing
traditional.
Me to a T.
Exactly. And
no, she's not.
Just like you, it's the Superman part. Superman parts his hair on the left. Dickie parts his hair on the left.
But Clark Kent doesn't.
Parting your hair on the right is perceived as this atypical, open, and radical, and is traditionally female. And Clark Kent parts his hair on the right. And I part my hair on the right. It's traditionally feminine. I don't do this intentionally, or I didn't think about it, but subconsciously, apparently, we not only pick up on these signals to suggest where we should part our hair, but how we should judge people who have their hair parted one way or another. And on the Superman Clark Kent thing, there's even a line in the film where Dickie takes Tom's glasses and puts them on and says, "What do I look like?" And he goes, "You look like Clark Kent."
Yeah.
In his eyes, in Tom's eyes, he's Superman. And he sees himself.
He's so
Clark
good looking
Kent.
that even with glasses on, he looks great. Damon does look so much better when he takes the glasses off. Law looks about the same. That's how good looking he is.
I don't want to beat the point to death, but good lord, it's practically pornography in this film.
Especially when he's in a Speedo, or at least a bathing suit.
Oh, yeah.
Also, one more thing about the hair. I did part it on the right for a long time. I don't recall if that was my choice or a previous hairdresser, but somewhere along the line, the guy that cut my hair, long dead, I'm pretty sure he changed it. Well, Matt Damon, this is the sixth film of his we've covered. Good Will Hunting, Saving Private Ryan, Dogma. There you go. A couple of years there. All those movies. Dogma's a supporting performance, granted. The Departed, The Departed, and Contagion, which he did with Law and Paltrow. Also, Chris and I covered Rounders, The Legend of Bagger Vance, Invictus, and Ford vs. Ferrari on Scoring at the Movies, the defunct sports movie podcast
He's
did with
well
him.
represented.
So this is the 10th movie we've done between the two podcasts, or that I've done between the two podcasts. By the way, a little note about Tom. I read this online, makes sense. Is he afraid of water? He's very uncomfortable when they're on the boat. He doesn't really go in the ocean when he pretends, "Oh my God, it's Dickie, I know you," pretending he knows him. That's also a curious thing, by the way, when he first meets Dickie and Marge. He'd never met them before. He pretends like he knows them, but he also admits why he's there. Right then, he says, "I'm here to bring you back. Your dad paid me to bring you back."
But that confession gives them intimacy.
I guess so,
right
yeah.
away. It endears Dickie to him right away. It's such a clever approach to be like, "Well, your dad's paying me to try and get you back to the
Except
States."
a lot of people would be mad and say, "Fuck off then." Even more so, fuck off. Anyway, Damon's been a huge part of the podcasting life for me, and for you too, but especially for me. Jude Law's been in 4 films now for us. AI, pretty good performance there, a couple years after this. Again, this time frame of 97-ish to 2001, 2002 for all these great stars. But AI, Contagion, and The Grand Budapest Hotel, smaller role in that film. Gwyneth Paltrow, we've done 6 times now. 7, Shakespeare in Love, where she won her acting Oscar. The Royal Tenenbaums, Iron Man, and Contagion. I said Cate Blanchett's credits already. Philip Seymour Hoffman, his 7th film we've covered. Boogie Nights, Happiness, again, this same time frame. Big Lebowski, also in 1998. Almost Famous, 25th Hour, and Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. What a great performance that was. And most of those movies we've covered the last couple of years. Literally the last couple of years, 2022, 2023, and now 2024. Also, he was in Moneyball, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies. Jack Davenport has a pretty big role in this, especially in the last maybe third of the film as Peter Smith Kingsley. He plays Norrington in the original Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy. I think he's well, there's a lot of bad guys in a way, but I think he's the one that's always on Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley's ass. I believe that's his role. James Rebhorn, who does play the dad, Herbert Greenleaf, was in Basic Instinct, Independence Day, and Far From Heaven. He also was in Cold Mountain with Jude Law and Philip Seymour Hoffman. And he was in Scent of a Woman with Philip Seymour Hoffman. So a lot of crossover in all these movies.
He's a total that guy actor.
And then Philip Baker Hall worked with Hoffman a lot because they were both in the PTA films for a while there. Boogie Nights, they were both in that. Air Force One, The Truman Show, and Argo. He's got a small role in some of those, but he's in all of them. Great character actor, by the way, Philip Baker Hall. Most of those movies we've covered the last couple of years, I guess, too. Minghella only made 7 movies as a director. He died in, what was that again?
He died pretty young.
He died in 2008, only 54 years old. Yeah, he won the Oscar for The English Patient, Best Director, and then also did Cold Mountain for Harvey. Like we said, Law's in that, Hoffman's in that, and so is Rebhorn. And Renee Zellweger won an Oscar for that, Best Supporting Actress. Juliette Binoche won for English Patient. A lot of nominations and wins for actors when he made a movie.
Now, you strongly dislike Cold Mountain, is that right?
I will watch it again one day. I didn't like it very much when I saw it, but I've only ever seen it one time.
I loved it.
I hated her in that, especially, Zellweger.
Well, it's funny. I like Renee Zellweger fine, but she's so annoying in that movie.
Yes.
She overdoes it so much. And of the 3 Minghella films that I really know well, which would be English Patient, this, and Cold Mountain is not his best film.
Patricia Highsmith's 1955 novel is what Minghella adapted, and he always wrote his own screenplays. What a loss. Too bad we lost this guy so long ago. Tom Sternberg and William Horberg were producers on this. Obviously, Harvey and Bob were executives, but Sternberg worked on Apocalypse Now and Lost Highway the year before, or 2 years before this. And Horberg worked on Searching for Bobby Fischer. Chris and I covered that one too on Scoring at the Movies. He was an executive on Milk, and he won an Emmy for The Queen's Gambit, that TV show about chess. The movie's 185-1. We ponied up the dough to watch it on Prime. John Seale shot it. He also shot Rain Man and then went on to win an Oscar for The English Patient. Walter Murch, one of your favorites, cut it. He won 3 Oscars in his life, including 2 for The English Patient. One of those was the sound. The other one was the editing. He was the sound guy, and I think the editor, on one of the editors on Apocalypse Now. Godfather Part 3, he also cut that. And he did sound and cutting on so many Coppola and Lucas films back in the day. Great editor, really smart guy. Also did the Touch of Evil recut that they did many years ago, I think 25 or 30 years ago.
He is considered just the godfather, he's like the patron saint of editors. He wrote the book that's considered the Bible for editing. It's called In the Blink of an Eye, and it's just meant for editors to understand the craft and what makes an editor great.
He was editing and doing sound up until the last couple of years at least. He's not dead yet. He's still alive, according to the IMDb. He is 80 years old now, but he's not
a legend.
gone yet.
I was thinking, because I've seen this movie plenty of times, but I was paying close attention to the editing because this is a Walter Murch film. I guess you could argue that the film has a lull in the middle. It loses so much steam once Dickie dies.
Yeah, Dickie needs to die, but the movie loses a lot when he is gone. Yeah.
Tom, as a rule, cannot have that level of charisma, and so it becomes harder to enjoy. But it's still educational to watch scene by scene and look at the choices that he makes and the things that he's choosing to have us focus on for how long. And beautiful film to study as a practice of editing. And cinematography, too. Like I said, Minghella has such an eye, and this is such a beautifully shot film. And we also need to pay tons of credit to the production design and specifically the costume design, which got an Oscar nomination.
They both did. Costumes and
right,
sets.
Yeah, that's right. Such a beautiful job of setting the scene on what I understand was a pretty small budget to have a period film in Europe. and there's so many beautiful touches in those costumes, and especially Tom, the way that the costumes do so much work to tell you where his mind's at and who he's supposed to be and how he's constantly wearing other people's clothes. I don't know if you noticed, but at the very end, well, it's the beginning and the end because this book-ended scene where he's sitting in the cabin next to Peter's dead body. Do you notice what he's wearing?
Is it Peter's clothes?
It's Peter's coat. He has this big kind of pea coat. Well, it's not pea coat.
Now he's going to be Peter.
Well, he probably won't. I don't think he could get away with that too, but it's more assuming other people's identities and how well his clothes even fit him. That corduroy jacket, you could probably write an essay about just the jacket alone and what it says about his character and how it helps to inform the audience about where he's at.
Budget-wise, it was $40 million, and it made $128 worldwide, so definitely a very successful film. But here domestically, basically double the budget, which is not that successful. But $40 million for this kind of production, overseas mostly, almost all of it shot in Italy. There's a little bit in New York at the beginning. With these actors, who probably weren't that expensive at this point, but they weren't cheap either. I'm sure they weren't free. And a lot of actors, there's quite a big cast here. Yeah, he made the most out of his money, meaning Minghella and obviously Harvey and everybody else involved, the producers. Gabriel Yera did the music. He won the Oscar for The English Patient as well. And he's always writing scores and writing anything else down. But you look on his resume, it's just music, 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 music. Guy's writing music all the time. You just said you love the look and the cutting and the cinematography. So, unless you have anything else, we'll wrap it up.
I really enjoyed revisiting it. I hadn't seen it in a long time. I think this film is just so thoughtful and beautiful, and it hasn't aged a day in 25 years.
It's a glamorous, well-crafted, and intelligent film. The cast is excellent, the script is pretty terrific, and it's even fun, considering we're spending the whole movie rooting for a guy who ends up killing three people.
It's a thriller,
and
it's thrilling.
He might kill more than the three. I like it. In fact, I would sooner watch this 2 or 3 more times than bother with The English Patient again. Although I suppose we'll see that at some point during a future Oscar month. I probably should watch that again, too. I've only ever seen that once. I didn't hate it, but I don't really care about it, put it that way. We have to root for a Nazi, for one thing.
Yeah,
Ray Fiennes' character. So that was how we saw the talented Mr. Ripley. On Friday, I'll be posting my 3rd solo show this month. I surprised our audience with a podcast this past Friday when I reviewed the Marx Brothers comedy romp, Horse Feathers. This time it'll be a thriller about another terrible, selfish man, well, not the Marx Brothers, but compared to Tom Ripley, as the immortal Herd Hatfield plays the title character in The Picture of Dorian Gray. We've had that on the PVR for a long time. I finally watched it, and I'll be covering that on Friday. As for when Bev and I sit down in this room again, that'll be next Monday. We'll be covering her final flick in this year's month of Bev, as we talk about Steven Soderbergh's breakout hit, Sex, Lies, and Videotape. Another movie I've not seen in a very long time. I remember a little bit more about that than some of the other ones we've talked about lately where it's basically new to me. But again, I don't remember that much about it, so it's going to feel like it's relatively new to me at least. The coming attractions trivia for Sex, Lies, and Videotape. James Spader was widely acclaimed for his performance in Sex, Lies, which is of course a movie about erotic subject matter. We've only covered Spader once before now. Speaking of eroticism, the dog is licking herself so thoroughly.
It's really making a meal out of it over here.
So we've only covered Spader once before now. That film was also about controversial sex. What was that movie?
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Sex, Lies, and Videotape. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. While you're there, leave us a rating and a review. It's a great way to support the podcast. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. Or you can reach us by email. Have you ever seen podcast@gmail.com.
Aren't you on Threads as well?
I am on Threads. I'm at Bev Ellis on Threads as well. You can find me there.
Exact same ID.
You could create a Threads account. Nothing's stopping you from joining through one of us.
Fucking stopping you.
Come on, become one of us. You can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYESLS. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES, where you can enjoy a 20% discount on us.
Let's put the dog in a bath and I can stroke the water and suggest things. She's just flaunting herself right now. Anyway, it's better to be a real cut than a fake one.
And cut.
Bevy, how's the cutting? Hey, Bevy, how's the cutting?